You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 150 of Making Tracks, brought to you by those fine folk over at fanfortracks.com. My name's Mark, one of your co-hosts, and joining me this week, and in fact every week when he's not flitting around the galaxy, it's Mr. Mark Newbold. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
I'm very good.
Feels like it's been a while since we last spoke, actually. I can't remember when we recorded 149, was it?
It's a few weeks ago, because we've had all that New York Comic Con content, and we've got the stuff from the Space Center, and we've been doing reaction chats as well. It's a birthday weekend, basically. It's 5 years of Fantha Tracks on the 31st of October. It's 10 years since Disney announced they were buying Lucasfilm on the 30th of October. It's all go. It's our 150th studio episode. Everything's peachy. How's things with you?
Things are good. A little bit sore. I was at MCM London yesterday at the XL Centre with the 501st UK Garrison in my Boba Fett costume. It's comfortable, but also it does put a bit of stress and strain on the old shoulders and the neck with a jetpack. So, yeah, a little bit sore today. But the big question, I suppose, can you remember where you were when you heard the news, or the news broke that Disney was acquiring Lucasfilm?
I can tell you exactly where I was. It was announced at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, that's right.
I was in my living room. My phone pinged. It was Paul Bateman. And Paul went, "Call me now." So I called him, went into the kitchen, "Call me now." Called him and he went, "Have you heard the news?" "What news?" "Hadn't seen it." Unusual for me because I'm generally on top of these things. Basically, we spent the next 2 hours talking about, oh my God, I can't believe it. Because I'd been in a weird conversation not that long before with Randy Martinez, the artist, and with Carl Newman and with Paul about whispers that Lucasfilm might be sold and that George was kind of looking to retire. And what companies might buy it? Would NBC buy it? Would Universal buy it? Will it be a big Chinese conglomerate? Could Disney buy it? Will Spielberg buy it? And all these thoughts were flying around.
Yeah, interesting.
And of course, it ends up being Disney, which is works out pretty well, I would say. 2 hours walking around the kitchen, and I can't believe it's 10 years. What about you?
I was in the bath, but I was in the bath reading on my iPad. I got a Twitter notification. I literally almost dropped my iPad into the bath because it was like Disney buys Lucasfilm, new Star Wars films announced. And I was like, oh my God. And the then wife was like, what's going on? What's going on? It's like, Disney have just bought Lucasfilm. There's going to be new Star Wars films. And you could just hear like oh, great. Well, I thought it was something important.
That was Ruth's reaction.
And it's like, but you don't understand this for fans. Just for the prospect of an infinite source for Star Wars going into the future. It was epic news. I think I can remember listening to I think it would have been Rebel Force Radio. They did a very long, like 2 or 3 hour podcast that night, and they had Carl Newman on it, and I think even maybe Paul might have called in, and they were talking all about it, and so it was interesting. It'd be interesting to go back to not just Rebel Force Radio, but all those kind of speculative shows at the time, and just hear what people's thoughts were and what they were thinking, and just kind of go, right, I wonder how much of this has come true and stuff like that, because it was sky blue, evergreen kind of thinking. Especially when it came to what we're going to get from the sequel trilogy as well, which is, we all know how, as good as it has been, how kind of polarizing it's been to the fandom. And I think irrespective of what you think about the sequel trilogy and the individual content from Disney Plus and the new books and stuff, I think it's fair to say that one decision by George has redeveloped the landscape for Star Wars and also for the fandom. You think about the people and the different identities that are now being represented in Star Wars content that wasn't before. It's a much more vibrant and interesting place to be part of.
2012 was Orlando Celebration.
Yeah.
Orlando. And I know that they'd started talking about it. I think the story came out a few years ago, and I forget who said it, whether it was Carrie or whether it was Mark, but basically George at that event sat them down, somewhere backstage in a room and said, I'm selling the company, but they're making more films and you guys are part of it. Yeah, it would be interesting to see what the reactions were. And it has been fascinating over the years to see the development, because the first thing we really got was Rebels. I mean, that was 2014, if I remember. So, they got out the gate pretty quick. I mean, Clone Wars had to finish. Lucasfilm cancelled Clone Wars because they got the deal with Cartoon Network. So that was a decision that worked out great because they came back and we got season 7 and now we've got Tales of the Jedi. Disney Plus was a long distant, glint in the eye of somebody somewhere thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we could do something like this? Galaxy's Edge, and probably scribbled on the back of a notepad somewhere back then as wouldn't it be nice if. Here we are in 2022 and it's 10 years. I don't know where those 10 years have gone. But for you, I mean, obviously with what you do with the Rebel Legion, were you XO then back in 2012?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I was. I think I just started being XO or the year before or something like that. I'd only just took on that role. So XO, for those who aren't aware, basically stands for Executive Officer. So second in command. And at the time it was Susie Stelling leading Elstree Base. And for us, it was a deluge of new costumes and greater demand for Star Wars appearances, which up until the pandemic hadn't really abated. However, it was Star Wars was focused. And funnily enough, yesterday, as I was walking around MCM London with a couple of fellow 501sters, we're talking about how actually, over the last 10 years, how the landscape has changed. Back in 2012, you'd go to MCM London and there was a cosplay community as such, and there was, it's still predominantly anime, but the role that Star Wars played in those Comic Cons in those early to mid, 2000s was a lot more prominent. And then now suddenly there's so many more properties and there's new, flavors of the month pretty much. Like in July at LFCC, every other person was wearing a Hellfire Club t-shirt. And now Star Wars it's become part of just like the much wider popular culture than it was back in 2012 when it was still the franchise and it was still very much like Star Wars. And now there's so many other shows and films and franchises and properties that are kind of all vying for that position. Has made the actual landscape a lot more crowded and therefore a lot more competitive. Up until 2012, we were still pouring over, and to be fair, we still do. Like, the references for just the X-Wing pilot from A New Hope. It was like that was the quintessential pilot costume. Now we have Gold Squadron, we have Blue Squadron, we have Resistance era costumes, and we also have like that in-between Mandalorian time when it's kind of like the New Republic, which is transitioning from the OT era costume into the Resistance costume. So everything's changed from costuming, and let alone like the fact that we now have 3D printers and resin printers so people can manufacture props at high quality in their garages without needing massive vac forms and everything else. So you look back and you go, wow, so much has happened and we've had so much from Star Wars in that time.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zebralios, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the Force be with you.
Star Wars Celebration, it's coming April 7th to the 10th next year at the XL. They've announced and revealed the key art, which, to my eyes, was rather beautiful. What did you make of it?
I really liked this in respects that it's very iconic. Nice to see that they using the silhouette of like a London cityscape, which is basically crammed every single thing in from a Wembley Arch all the way through to like Tower Bridge. Admittedly, the whole Death Star merging into the fighters is very similar to a t-shirt I've got, which is a Rebel logo. But I think this one clearly states, really, I think that there's going to be pretty big focus on Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
And the 40th anniversary of that. You've got the Death Star 2, got the Falcon leading the charge with this real kind of nice abstract painted kind of background. So I think it's going to be cool. And I think I ordered this when we ordered our tickets as a t-shirt. I think I ordered a key art t-shirt. So I'm hoping this is it because it does look pretty cool.
Look forward to seeing this hanging up all over the convention centre and being, if the tickets and passes are sort of based on this kind of artwork, that will be very welcome as well. And like you say, Jedi 40th, Essen was Jedi 30th, which does not seem like 9 years ago when we all sat in the park watching Jedi. Very pleased to see this. And like you say, I think this looks fantastic. I'm looking forward to having it on a t-shirt, yeah.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Earlier this week, I had the good fortune to sit down and have a one-to-one conversation with Nicholas Britell. He's the 3-time Academy Award nominated composer of Andor. He's done all sorts of other really interesting work across his career. We had a really lovely chat about that and, of course, Andor, what's already with us, what's coming in the future. So here's Andor composer Nicholas Britell.
I looked through your list of accomplishments and works, and I think the best phrase I could use is eclectic. So given the depth of work that you've done, and where you've come to this point. My question that I wrote down, and I shall read it as I wrote it down, was Star Wars, how?
I've always loved Star Wars. I mean, I think very few composers in the world who don't love what John Williams created for the world in so many ways, But you're right. I mean, I've worked on a wide range of different projects, both for film and television. And I think it's a good question of like, how does one find oneself in the Star Wars universe,
Yeah.
I remember one of my dearest colleagues, John Finkley, was the supervising music editor on Rogue One. And I forget exactly how he had first worked with Lucasfilm, but John is also like, I think I can confidently say one of the world's experts on the Star Wars universe as well. Right. He knows everything about Star Wars, literally everything. I remember first him telling me that I think Tony knew of my music, Tony Gilroy, our showrunner. But I'm pretty sure it was John who first said, if you're ever doing something, maybe give Nick a call, kind of a thing. But very I think it's very casual,
Yeah.
But what happened was it was about 2.5 years ago, I guess, where Tony and John did reach out actually and said, we do have this project. And I don't really know. I actually should ask Tony the full backstory about making, but I remember Tony reached out and said he would love to talk about this. And, this was right in the early days of the pandemic. And I talked to him a bit and we had really wonderful conversation. And I'll be honest, I'm a huge Tony Gilroy fan, massive Tony Gilroy fan. Michael Clayton is one of my and my wife's favorite movies. And he's such an amazing writer and he's an amazing director. And so I always wanted to work with Tony if that was ever possible, because you never know. But we had these conversations and it just started feeling really wonderful. And then we met up in August of 2020 and really got into it with exploring some of the on-camera music for the series. That was the first stuff we started figuring out. And honestly, you never know until you're in the room, I always feel. Until you're in the room, you don't know, you hope people like that. You never know, how is this going to work? But I just felt like we were in sync right away. And we just immediately started having 100 ideas and we're so productive right away, and it just evolved from there and we dove into it. And here I am speaking to you now.
It's probably a misnomer to think on my behalf, what is it about your music that would attract Lucasfilm and Tony to you? But by the same token, the way you describe that synergy is equally on your behalf. Whatever he's saying is sparking all the thoughts in your head as well. So when you came into this, obviously you're a 3-time Academy Award nominated composer, you've won awards, you know your craft. Did you go into that show with confidence as somebody who has got a previous love of Star Wars? Is the John Williams thing sitting on your shoulder? Where are you with this when you walk into that scenario?
It's a great question. First of all, I walk into every project starting with a totally blank slate. I think it's important that every project has its own unique sound. I think it's important that you bring your fullest set of sensitivities to discovering what that sound is to every project, But to your point, from the very first conversations that I had with Tony and with Kathy Kennedy, they made it really clear. They said, we really would like you to imagine a totally unique soundscape for Andor. They said they were hoping that, this is its own unique part of the story, its own unique part of this Star Wars universe. And so they felt it was so important right from day zero for me that I knew that, and that they were not just supporting me with that, but encouraging it. So I think right away, I never felt like I had to step into John Williams' shoes, let's say, because I adore John Williams. So I think that's a very challenging task to do. And some other composers have done remarkable work with that for sure, But I think for me with the task on Andor, it was a different task. It was a question of imagining something from the ground up. And then I think the interesting question was, as we went through the series, in what ways could we feel like Star Wars? Because it is Star Wars, but also perhaps it's a Star Wars that people haven't seen before, that we haven't seen before, So I think it was that interesting combination of starting, I think very clearly I started in episode 1 in a very real, dark, gritty way, where you're sort of saying to yourself, where are we? you see the logo Star Wars at the top, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, what is this? You know? And I think that was a goal in so many ways, was to have us all go, well, who is that? What is this? You know?
Yeah.
And then from there, as Cassian discovers things and as we learn with Cassian, all of a sudden, maybe some of the feelings of things start to come together. You know, it's as you start to discover where is the rebellion coming from and what is going to be as you start figuring that out, maybe you hear music that starts to, it's not the notes of any theme we've heard before, but I think, for example, some of the themes for Mon Mothma and the rebellion that I have latent have a texture of, oh, there's a sort of emotional struggle, a sort of yearning that I think to me feels like a proto. This is before Rogue One. This is before Star Wars. You know, we're gonna wind up there, but this is the earlier, you know, and even down to the orchestration. I think there's a sense of like, you know, the majestic grandeur of Star Wars. This is before that in some ways. You know, this is like more retro. This is synthesizers. This is a little murkier. You know what I mean? So that was the idea, was starting in this other place, and then as we go through it, you know, we're learning with Cassian, and perhaps things start becoming more full-fledged or more clear.
One thing struck me listening to it, when Lucas made the original Star Wars in 77, a lot of sci-fi then was that kind of quirky electronica, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
You know, and there's elements of this. There's places, I mean, you've really thrown, there's kitchen sinks in Star Wars in the past, but you've literally thrown kitchen sinks into this musically as well.
Yeah.
Is it freeing for you to look at Star Wars on the screen, but think, I'm not constricted by anything, but also as well that if a shade of Star Wars, familiar Star Wars came to your mind, you're not inhibited to go, I can't do that. If it feels right, let's go with it.
It's very liberating. Everyone was so supportive. And what I loved most was the conversations. You know, Tony lives 11 blocks from here. He would ride his bike down multiple times a week. We would work for hours at a time. Every minute detail was talked about and thought through. I'm not giving anything away, but, you know, while in the episodes people see, you know, there's no overt later themes of Star Wars, but there are things that at times I think feel like, you know, so for example, you know, looking up and seeing a Star Destroyer in the sky, you know, the ISB theme, it's not the Imperial theme, but there's an element of nefarious darkness to it, you know, and in some ways I think we focused on, there's different emotions and a different set of tones, both musically and emotionally, that Andor is leaning into. There's a sense of utter terror that Andor is evoking, you know, that the show is evoking. There's some of these moments that are almost like a different shade of darkness that we're feeling. And so for me, then music should have a different shade of darkness, or like you said, a different strangeness or a different modality.
Yeah. One thing that struck me talking to you and seeing you on my screen, clearly you really enjoyed this whole process, the collaborative nature, really sitting down with Tony Gilroy and really going through the nuts and bolts of it. One of your earlier projects was Whiplash, which I didn't know that you were a producer on.
Oh, I helped produce Whiplash, yes.
Yeah, and I've said this numerous times, in my humble opinion, I'm so glad I'm getting to say this to you, that the last 20 minutes of that film was the best 20 minutes of anything put on film in the last decade.
Well, I so much of the credit for that, obviously, Damien Chazelle, incredible. I mean, I remember watching the almost final cut of that movie and just saying to myself, oh my God, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, the way that he put that together, and Damien had such a pure vision for that film. It was really, that was very inspiring getting to.
But the collaboration between a creative and the composer of that project, I'm making assumptions. I'm assuming that you feel that is very important. It can only help your process and to marry these things so everyone's really on the same page.
The key to this whole enterprise, and I feel this so strongly with film music in particular, the key to the entire enterprise is this type of collaboration. I think sometimes people imagine that we composers are often in dark rooms by ourselves. So people think, oh, we're just concocting ideas and sending them off into the ether. Certainly for me, it's so far from the truth. I am constantly saying, Tony, come on over. I need to show you something. And I actually feel it's so important, because even just on a purely practical level, if, you know, music is complex, and film music is even more complex because of the way things interact. And so if you're not in the same room, seeing the same things, hearing the same things at the same time, it's actually quite difficult to solve problems, to work through things. The only way that I feel it's possible is to have Tony on the couch right there and to say, what do you think about this? And then if he says, well, I think maybe, and then I can say, oh, well, how about that? That immediate connection and conversation, at least to me, that's the only way I think it's possible, because otherwise you're increasing the level of difficulty by orders of magnitude.
Yeah. The music is now starting to get out there. Volume 1 for the first 4 episodes is out there now. Yes. How pleased are you that people can hear the music, not only in situ with the rest of the episode, but in isolation as just your music?
It's so wonderful because I spend so much time working on all albums. It's a whole process. I take all of the score from every project and I really try to put the albums together in a way where hopefully it's the best listening experience. We're not just taking things and putting them out there. We're really thinking about it and mastering it very carefully. So it's always exciting for people to hear the music and to hear it on its own. And there's a lot of music in Andor. There's over 7.5 hours of music that I wrote for Andor. So the Volume 1 is its own set of worlds and sounds. Volume 2 has a whole other scope that we get to, and certainly Volume 3 as well. So I'm excited for people to be able to hopefully delve into these in detail.
Brilliant. Vinyl box set, please. That would be awesome.
I would love that. Amen.
Brilliant. It's been so lovely to speak to you. We've enjoyed the music every week, and you're just as lovely as I hoped you would be. So thanks so much for giving us your time.
So good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
It's been a number of years now. Rosario Dawson has been known to be playing Ahsoka. We saw her in season 2 of The Mandalorian. She has live action Ahsoka, which she's still filming and is out next year. But of course, Ashley Eckstein has been Ahsoka since 2006. In reality, since 2008 with the Clone Wars movie. She's just returned for a couple of 3 episodes of Tales of the Jedi, which was wonderful. And the 2 actresses finally met on the set of Ahsoka. And Ashley had a little bit to say about that. She says, I've been waiting to meet her for 3 years, and I was so excited. It was an incredible moment. I don't want to start a rumour. People are like, she's on the set, she's playing the character. No, it was just a set visit, so I have not filmed a cameo for the Ahsoka series. I talk about throwing your dreams out into the universe, so it would be a dream come true if I got to do a cameo because my background is in live action. What do you make of that? It's a tricky one. We haven't talked about it before, and I know a lot of people in fandom have discussed, should it have been Ashley playing Ahsoka? Have they made the right decision? For me, they made the right decision. The 2 actresses do their individual parts of Ahsoka. It can work. What do you make of this meeting? It was a nice moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that would have been really nice to see. I'm sure we'll see it. I'm sure it'll be in the gallery episode or whatever they're going to call the behind the scenes of Ahsoka. Ashley Eckstein for the longest period has been the voice, but also, and probably still is, the soul of Ahsoka.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring this up. It's a point that we discuss in this week's episode of Reaction Chats. In episode 8, you have Andy Serkis, who is the voice of Supreme Leader Snoke in The Force Awakens and Last Jedi, now playing an actual character in Andor. For me, that pulled me a little bit out of that character a little bit. I just don't know why. And so I suppose it depends on what the character is. I'd quite like to see Ashley, have a role, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a cameo. I think sometimes a cameo could be a little bit too, that's just Ashley. But, if she was given something to do, something that had a bit of weight behind it, that would be interesting. For one, I couldn't tell you what Ashley's like as an actress, or an actor, I should say. I mean, I don't know what the last thing she'd actually been on screen in other than documentary type stuff for Star Wars. So it would be interesting to see if they could both kind of share the screen. That would be really interesting.
Because in Mando season 1, if I remember, you had the Matt Lanter cameo when he played the Rebel Fleet Trooper on that prison station, which was really cool to see him because it's Matt Lanter and he's the voice of Anakin, and it was cool. But it did feel like, let's get our buddy in to do a little moment, and it did feel a little bit throwaway. A bit like when Filoni and Rick Famuyiwa and Deb Chow turned up as the X-Men pilots.
I think that out of all of it was probably the worst choice. I mean, I know it's kind of like, it wasn't very well executed, But then at the same time, having then Dave come back in season 2 as like, you know, Trapper Wolf, then kind of suddenly gives it slightly more legitimacy, because it's like, oh, he's not just going to be a fly-by-night kind of cameo. He's actually, you know, they kind of brought him back, which is quite interesting.
They probably looked. You talked about Jedi earlier with Celebration, and there's obviously the Richard Marker and Robert Watts scene in the ATST in Jedi. That if you didn't know it was them, you'd never know it was them. You wouldn't know. No, you'd never know. And the thing is, and that is the thing, isn't it? Like Dave Filoni, possibly, but then it's like, you know, you take the cowboy hat away from him, and it's just like he could be just a random guy. You know, it's a cowboy hat that actually, in, you know, for better or for worse, I guess, and that's probably why he's done it, makes him so synonymous. But it is interesting because it's like, it's almost, I don't want to say it's stunt casting, but it starts to can smell a little bit like stunt casting. But the thing is also, you kind of think, and I know what it's like, it's how the media industry kind of works to a degree. You work with who you like and who you get on with, and also who's good. And that also does mean that sometimes you throw people a bit of a bone. So, you know, I'm sure people, when they found out that Dave was doing, you know, Mandalorian and that, would probably kind of go, hey, you know, if there's a part for me. I mean, come on, I would. If I knew somebody of any clout in a Star Wars film, you're damn right I'd be asking them. Hell, Daniel Craig got asked for a part in The Force Awakens. And you know, so Daniel Craig, I mean, it's hard to pick you apart in a lineup.
I know, right? Exactly, especially in First Order Stormtrooper armor. So, but you know, it depends on how you do it, and it depends on how you kind of square it away. I mean, because like Matt Lanter, for example, I actually watched that first episode and didn't clock it was Matt Lanter. You know, kind of looks familiar a little bit, but I couldn't tell you where. That's probably good casting in some respect, or good direction and everything else. Is actually, you could give Ashley a role, but as long as it's, you know, I don't know, another Draguta or something like that, or, you know, something that is so too close to what Ahsoka's doing, then, you know, she could just be like, I was going to say Dabo Girl, but that's Deep Space Nine and Star Trek. she could be in a, you know, she could just be like a Cantina patron, or, you know, or somebody, like, you know, she could be like another Peli Motto type thing. You know, it's how you do it, isn't it? And what I do like about how Star Wars is that they don't make a big deal about it. You know, they let people find out for themselves as they watch the episodes. There's never like a big promotional kind of thing about like, you know, next week on The Mandalorian, familiar face returns, and it's like, you know, shot of like Dave Filoni putting on a cowboy hat or something. I'm more than happy to start or join the Ashley Eckstein needs a role in Ahsoka lobby.
Well, she's not just turned up on set of Ahsoka. She is, as we said, back as Ahsoka in Tales of the Jedi. She also mentions that in this EW interview. And again, Ashley speaking, she says, it was just incredible. I never take anything for granted. Every single time I finish a project, I never think, okay, well, what's the next one? I just look at it with gratitude, and I'm just so happy I still get to voice Ahsoka all these years later. And it is, as you say, a number of years now, 10 years since the Disney sale, time's cracking on. We were all in our various studios, all in different states, but the crew was there, and I recorded with Matt Lanter, and James Arnold Taylor. So it was really special, especially during that time in COVID. So many moments we didn't get to see, and so many questions that we have. And I think this is a great way to explore those questions and answer those questions. So we're starting with 6, but man, it would be a dream if we got to make more. So she's alluding to Tales of the Jedi. 6, 12 to 15-minute episodes, all great fun. I've seen all 6. I put a review up on the site. It's had great traction. People have been commenting and talking about it. I know you're working your way through the series at the moment. What are you making of it so far, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I really like it. I have only had the chance to see 2 episodes, unfortunately. So, you know, the first 2 with Baby Ahsoka, and the second one with Qui-Gon and Count Dooku. It's great. I really like this idea. These kind of anthologies are great that they're doing, because you would think, well, yeah, this is also perfect for this was a comic book series, you know, Tales of the Jedi and that. But the nice thing is that the aesthetic, the Clone Wars aesthetic and quality that we've known from that and Bad Batch and that is there. So I'm really looking forward to kind of finishing the rest, and hopefully we can maybe have a longer, more in-depth chat about it once I have.
Hello, I'm Dennis Lawson, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So Star Wars had another, because it's had them before, successful Saturn Awards ceremony night. It walked away with a number of awards. Quite often it was beating itself out. I nearly said beating itself off, but beating itself in certain categories. It's won the Animation Award category once again. It's won it every year since the award's inception in 2017. Ming-Na Wen won for the role of Fennec Shand in The Book of Boba Fett. She was absolutely stoked about that, talking about it online quite a lot. Hayden for Kenobi, stunning performance. Moses Ingram, Best Supporting Actress in a Streaming Series. Great that she won that. Kenobi won Best Limited Series as well. Bad Batch Best Animated, as we just mentioned. And then just slightly outside of that, Oscar Isaac won for Moon Knight, and Ki Hai Kwan for Everything Everywhere All at Once. short round from Temple of Doom. So it was a really good night.
To be fair, Ming-Na Wen was probably, for me, the standout performance in The Book of Boba Fett. And to be fair, Moses Ingram as well in Kenobi. I think her performance was head and shoulders, I think, above most of the cast. Yeah, well done to everybody. And let's hope that as the award season kind of starts to really kick off in another kind of month or so, we get some more accolades to talk about.
Wouldn't that be nice? And we wrapped up the article on the site with Vivian Lara Blair and Hayden Christensen. Absolutely lovely picture. Father and daughter, essentially, posing at the awards. And just to say, Vivian Lara Blair is coming to Wales Comic Con in Telford later on this year. She's one of the key guests there. So if you're in the area, you're able to get there. It's a fantastic show. Fantha's gone to that show for a number of years and always had a great time. So we will be there. Hopefully we'll see some of you there. But just to say, and we'll post more news. There's loads more Star Wars guests coming to Wales. But Vivian Lara Blair will be at Wales Comic Con in Telford.
Yes, December 3rd and 4th, I think.
There you go. See, somebody knows.
Fantatrax.
40 years ago, Star Wars A New Hope first showed on UK screens. It was Sunday the 24th of October. It was on ITV, and it gave a lot of kids not only the first chance to see it since they saw it in the cinema back in the day, for many it was the first time they saw it ever. Star Wars had just come out on VHS, on home video, Betamax, Video 2000 as we had back then, and video disc. And Empire wasn't available at all until 84, and Jedi was coming the following year to the cinema. So it was quite a mixed up bag for fans of the OT back in the day. Craig Stevens, who wrote the Star Wars Phenomenon in Britain book, which is a brilliant book if you've not read it, it's fantastic, well worth checking it out. He goes back to a January 1982 article mentioning that Lucasfilm had been displeased with the sale of Star Wars to America's CBS TV network. Sid Ganis will go on to be a big cheese, I think, at Paramount, but back then he was the PR guy for Lucasfilm. Sid Ganis was quoted as saying, "If it were up to Lucasfilm, we wouldn't sell Star Wars to TV. There is considerable theatrical life in the film, and that's why Lucasfilm will not sell the TV rights of The Empire Strikes Back or Revenge of the Jedi, as it was called then." And as Craig says, in truth, Lucasfilm had provided approval for the release of Star Wars on TV and home viewing formats during the complex final negotiations with 20th Century Fox over Return of the Jedi. Lucasfilm had previously insisted renting the film to cinemas was far more lucrative. And I read that out not just as a historical piece, but over the years, Lucasfilm, or rather Lucas, turned out to be quite a visionary in the future of digital cinema around the Phantom Menace era, and realising that going to the cinema will eventually be like going to the opera. And there's all these changes that he always seemed to be quite finger on the pulse of, and wasn't too precious about changing the long view opinion as the world changed around the formats and locations and places you would consume Star Wars. The thought that Lucasfilm weren't going to sell Empire and Jedi to television minutes after we've just been talking about all the amazing stuff on Disney Plus really does show how the world, while Star Wars is a constant, the world has just changed around Star Wars, hasn't it?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, and that's the thing, Star Wars kind of adapts to it. Can you imagine having that conversation with like a 1982 version of yourself, saying that in 40 years' time, you'll be able to turn on your TV and watch anytime you like a Star Wars film without having to actually put in a VHS or a Betamax tape into your player, But we are seeing it. Stuff like Dolby Vision and the 4DX viewing experience that you get at Cineworld, those kind of viewing experiences come at a premium. If you go to the Odeon Lux in Leicester Square, it's 40 quid a ticket. You used to pay 40 quid a ticket for a pretty decent seat in a theatre, and in fact you still can. You can still go and get cheap tickets for West End play for that kind of price. I wonder if one of the things he got ILM to do at some point or another was to build himself a time machine. It's uncannily accurate sometimes, but I think that's just for kind of the savantness of how we understand the industry, and I think also how he understands people. The only way that cinema is going to survive is to allow these films to have longer runs, and you see what it did to Maverick. Maverick was in the cinemas for months.
Do you think then that if cinemas were brave enough to leave films on the screens, and I mean Maverick really did capture the imagination of a lot of people, didn't it? But if these films were available, I know me and Ruth will look at seeing a film, and if we don't see it in the first couple of weeks, generally it feels like, we've missed it, we'll catch it on Netflix or Amazon, Disney or whatever, which is such a shame because these films are made for the big screen. But do you think if the bigger films, I don't know, 2025 when the next Star Wars film comes out and it's the Damon Lindelof film that people have been talking about lately,
Yeah.
and it's a sequel trilogy era film, and and they go and do that, and it comes out and it does well. If they leave it in the cinema longer, it'll do more money. I'm thinking Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness did 960 million, almost broke the billion, didn't break the billion because they pulled it off the big screens and put it on Disney+. Do you think films would do better if they left them out there longer?
It is a fairly exponential curve, isn't it? And a downward curve. After the first couple of weeks, you do see a smaller return from box office sales. But then I saw all of the sequel trilogy more than 10 times in the cinema. And so there are nut jobs who will see the same film over and over again, for one. But sometimes people just don't get that opportunity. That was kind of a downside, I think, even with all the sales that they did for the Star Wars films over Christmas. Some people still didn't get a chance to see it until later in January when it was just dying out. And you think, well, that was before we had Disney+. Now we've got Disney+. You can see that they do 3 or 4 weeks and then they just pull it. After if Force Awakens is released at the same time, like was it December 14th or 15th, but keep it on over Christmas, that first week when all the schools go back, it'll probably go out from cinema. But I saw it near the end of January. I know they talk about piracy, but there's no real harm for it to spend a couple more weeks in the cinema before it hits the streaming services. Unless, of course, they can prove that their subscription numbers are maintained because people get earlier access to movies without having to go to the cinema. Then I can maybe slightly understand it a little bit, because I suppose especially now when the cost of everything is going up and you go, right, I'm paying $10 or whatever it is a month for Disney Plus. Do I want to wait and use my Disney Plus subscription to then see Doctor Strange, or do I want to fork out another 10 quid per family member to go and see Doctor Strange on top of the extra £500 billion it costs you on drinks and chocolate and popcorn? So I suppose you could kind of actually see nowadays, because of the economic downturn of that and the cost of living, that actually might have a even greater effect on cinema, which, for me is a little bit worrying.
Certainly films like Star Wars and the Marvels and things that you just mentioned, Top Gun and such, do need to be seen on the big screen. Specifically Star Wars, it's always been the circus coming to town, hasn't it, when Star Wars arrives at the cinema? It's a big deal. Everyone's talking about it. There's adverts and trailers and posters and the sides of buses, and it's a big deal. And the world has changed so much because not only of things, really contemporary things like Disney Plus, it's only been around for sort of 3-4 years at this point, just the changing of how people access Star Wars. Nobody was downloading Return of the Jedi in 1983. Everyone was sitting there on 56k dial-ups trying to get Phantom Menace trailers in 1998. And you get through to the end of the trilogy and there's leaks on Revenge of the Sith. And then from Clone Wars onwards, most of these films, not that you need to now, but you could find them if you really wanted to find them. But the heart of it is that Star Wars is still the centre of this whirlpool that the world seems to be spinning around. 40 years since it came to the UK on the small screen, but Star Wars needs to be seen on the big screen, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. 110%. Couldn't agree more. Okay, so like a oddly shaped Christmas present, we're going to wrap this sucker up and call it an end for episode 150. Unfortunately, no listeners' question. However, I'm sure before too long we will get some in. So, Mark, could you let the listeners know if they want to send in a tongue twister or a brain teaser or any kind of thought-ferial comment, how can they do it?
Well, I can do that, but first of all, I want to say to everybody, thanks for listening to Making Tracks. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit panthertracks.com or check out the free Panther Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us. I've missed that. It's been too long since we've done that. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@panthertracks.com. Like Mark just said, get your questions in, get your thoughts in, get your queries in, get your complaints in. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Panther Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Panther Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember to tune into our Panther Tracks news show. It's Good Morning Tatooine, live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on Facebook and YouTube. And right now you can find those episodes on Thursday nights as well. Brian will go through the latest episode of Andor or whatever show's on at the time with rotating a different guest presenter. And also on Friday nights, check out our Panther Tracks Friday night rotation, 7 p.m. Friday evenings, with Panther from Down Under, Desert Planet Disc, Planet Layer, Start Your Engines, Cannon Fodder, Collecting Tracks, and special episodes of Making Tracks. And that's me done for this episode.
Well done, mate. Here's to another at least 5 years of Panther Tracks, if not more. Cheers, buddy. And everybody else, as Mark's already said, thank you very much for listening. Take care, stay safe. We will be back very soon with another episode or something or other. But until then, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Panther Tracks Radio, it's Cannon Fodder.